Started. Good afternoon, and thank you all for coming. Special thanks to Kim Drumgo, who will be presenting Reimagining Inclusion today. A few weeks ago at our town hall, our executive sponsor for our diversity and inclusion efforts, Brian Cook, presented some data surrounding D&I and where the DO stands on the greater picture. We are very excited to keep working towards being an exceptional place to work through driving these inclusion efforts. And with that, he shared some guiding principles related to this, which is to accelerate growth and to take the company where we want to go. We must embrace inclusion and the individuals who bring new perspectives and life experiences to our teams. We hire the best talent regardless of race, religion, demographic, orientation, or gender. It is the diversity of these people and ideas that inspire innovation in everything that we do. As a company, we continue to increase accountability and to foster inclusive thoughts and actions. So with that, thanks Kim for coming. Kim is a well-recognized leader with deep knowledge for diversity, inclusion, and belonging best practices. She is currently the Director of Diversity and Inclusion with the AICPA. She provides expertise in understanding various dimensions of diversity, including ethnicity, race, generation, gender, abilities, and LGBTQ. She has successfully led the development and implementation of diversity inclusion strategies, D&I councils, and various tools and programs that foster an inclusive work environment. She is also a results-driven leader offering over 24 years of leadership in professional services, not-for-profit, government, and technical industries. So let's give Kim a warm welcome for coming.
Hello. How's everyone today? Good. It's a beautiful sunny day in North Carolina, certainly a change from what we've had over the last couple of days and the last week. And so again, my name is Kim Drumgo, and before I get started, I wanted to recognize that it's Yom Kippur today. It started yesterday at sunset and completes today. And so for all of my Jewish friends out there, I hope you've had a easy fast and happy holidays to you. Like you know, I'm from the AICPA, which is the Association of International Certified Professional Accountants. And I started doing diversity work many, many years ago. Actually, it was while I was at Blue Cross and Blue Shield of North Carolina when I was a technical project manager leading multiple projects, database server integrations. I was all into that technology and loved it. I loved what I was doing. Until our SVP of HR came to me and said, Kim, we'd like for you to serve on this diversity committee. And I said, I don't know, I like technology. I like doing, things that I know are going to be successful. I know the outcomes. And so I was very reluctant on the diversity committee. But when the SVP of HR, the guy whose name is on your paycheck sometimes, helps you get promoted, asks you to do something, you do it. So I did it. And immediately I saw where diversity and inclusion was very different than what I thought. I thought D&I was about EEO, equal opportunity, affirmative action, where we were trying to meet quotas in our staffing and promotions. But I quickly realized that it was very, very different. Diversity and inclusion was about how to bring people of different backgrounds to the table, how to make sure that they're included when they're at the table. And so I recognized very quickly that it wasn't about a color. It wasn't about black or white, yellow, red. The color was green. And companies are doing this really to help maximize the talent that they have in their organizations to reach the outcomes that their organization is. So that's where my passion grew. That's where I and I wanted to do more. So after a couple of years, they said, okay, who wants to lead the diversity office at Blue Cross and Blue Shield? And I raised my hand. I was actually on maternity leave when the announcement went out. And I came in for my interview, had to go to the bathroom because I had an infant, nursing, and then come back to the interview. It was really amazing. And I got the job. And I haven't regretted a day doing that. So on my first day, I got to my desk. I got a FedEx package. And I opened up the FedEx package and I looked at it and it said Race Relations, Corning Glassware, and the speaker was my father, Ron Brown. And so I picked up the phone. I was like, Dad, We went through 2 months of agonizing, having conversations of whether or not I'd leave technology and go into D&I, and you never told me about this. He was like, I didn't want to influence you. I wanted you to do this on your own. I was like, wow, so it's in my blood. He was like, not only is it in your blood, not only did I do it, but your grandfather did it too. Your grandfather was in D&I also. So it's in the family, I have to say. But anyway, I wanted to talk about diversity and inclusion and reimagining inclusion today, because if we think about where we are, come so far. We have the iPhone. I don't know what I would do without my iPhone. I don't know how I manage my iPhone when it goes out, right? So my iPhone technology is definitely something that's really, really important to us and how our society has changed. Social media is another area where we've really begun to see how close we can connect with people from across the globe. And then I always have to mention my PS4. My son loves Fortnite. And so instead of having sleepovers, he likes to stay up all night on Fortnite with his friends, right? So that's kind of cool. I don't have to deal with multiple kids in the house, but he's up until 2, 3 o'clock in the morning playing Fortnite. So that's the technology. But we also recognize some areas in our society, in our politics, that we thought we'd never go back to, right? We thought that we'd never see things that we thought as a country we were over. So in essence, we're seeing a lot of progression and we're seeing some regression. And that's really why I want to imagine inclusion, how we reimagine diversity and inclusion. So I'm going to start off with the definition. So diversity. Diversity is about who we are. It's what you see when you walk up to me. You have all the things that you see about me right in front of you. I'm a woman. I'm a brown woman. Some people may or may not know I'm African American. That's a debate on my team about that, and I'll talk to you about that a little bit later. You know, I'm a mother. I told you I'm a mother, but you can't tell that by looking at me. Right? Diversity are those things that you can see, characteristics that you can see. There are also the invisible characteristics of diversity that we don't talk about, right? Veteran status, preference, my communication style, my religion. All of those are elements of diversity. Diversity is about who we are. Each of us is diverse. And it makes me crazy when I'm in a meeting and we're like, we need a diverse candidate. And I look around at everyone, I'm like, all of you guys, right? Because we all represent some aspect of diversity. And then there's inclusion. Inclusion is what we do with that diversity. It's how we put that diversity to work. So are we including diversity at all levels in our organization? Are we including that diversity in critical decisions on behalf of our clients and our customers? So that inclusion piece is really important. And I believe you can't have one without the other, right? You've got to have both. But then there's the reimagining piece that I want you to think about. And that's belonging, right? So if we think about diversity as who we are, inclusion being what we do, belonging is how we feel. Now, I can be at that table. I can be diverse. I can be at that table, but I might not feel like I belong there. And that's a critical element that I want us all to begin to think about. Because belonging is a basic physiological need that we all have as humans. Let's talk about that a little bit. Everybody remember Psych 101, Maslow's hierarchy of needs? Yeah? I remember it was a summer day. I walked all the way from South Campus to North Campus at UNC to go to my Psych 101 class. And one of the first things that we talked about was Maslow's hierarchy of needs and how in order for us to be to reach our fullest potential, there are 5 different levels that we go through. The first one is that physiological, right? We talked about that. That's our food, shelter, and water. We have to have that in order to succeed, in order to grow, in order to just be present, right? The next one is safety. We need to feel secure. We need to be free of fear. The third one being belonging. Having a connection to wherever we are and to wherever we work, wherever family we're in, we need to have that sense of connection. And then there's also the self-esteem. That gets us to self-esteem. Once we've gotten through all 3 of those, we can get to the self-esteem and self-actualization, which is really where we are at our highest performance level. be, right? When we're at work, when we're at home, we all want to get to that level. But at any given day or any given moment, we're stuck on any of the bottom elements. We can't perform. We're unable to reach our potential. And so thinking about this, think about safety, security, and free of fear. Think about the movement. How many women aren't feeling like they're safe? They're not free of fear when they're in the work environment, or even think about discrimination, you know? And so we get stuck at that safety piece. But then I think most of us get stuck at that belonging piece. Do we feel like we belong? Do we feel like we're a part of the team? Do we feel like we're a part of this, you know, this greater vision that the company or, you know, community that we're in is trying to achieve? So belonging is really, really important. And they actually say that the neurons that are in our brain that control our triggers for hunger and food and sleep are the same neurons that are used for belonging. So it's one of those ingrained things that we absolutely have to have. So let's talk about how belonging shows up. How do we get belonging? How do we feel like we belong? 88% of us choose family as a marker of belonging, right? So if you think about where you're most comfortable, where you can be your most authentic self, where is it? With your family? Is that right? Would you guys agree? Yes. And your family is how you define your family. You know, you could be an adopted family. It could be, you know, whatever family you consider family, that's where you feel most connected. And I like to use the story. I don't know if any of you guys are Ice Age fans. Okay. So in Ice Age, there is the mammoth. There's a big mammoth, and her name is, there's a big Manny, and then there's, I think Ellie is her name. Okay. So Manny is walking through the icebergs trying to find a baby, and mammoth, and he's like, Ellie, oh my gosh, you're like me. You're another mammoth. Ellie doesn't believe that she's a mammoth. She believes that she's a possum, right? And so Ellie is, you know, acting like a possum, playing dead, trying to hang upside down like a possum. Ellie had no idea what she looked like. She only knew her family. And she only knew that being like her possum family is where she felt connected and where she had that deep, you know, connection and admiration where she could be herself, right? Which was a possum. So family is definitely a huge indicator of how we feel like we belong. The next one, let's see. This isn't working, or should I go the other way? I can keep going while you change the slide. Okay. All right, the next one is friendships. So 65% saw friendships as a marker of belonging as well. So the friends that we make at home, the friends that we make here in the office, that is a marker of belonging as well. 65% of these individuals surveyed by the Society of Interaction identified belonging or friendships as a marker of belonging. And so, you know, but your friends change, right? So the friends that I have are some of the same friends, but most of them are not. But friends are definitely this marker of how we feel like we belong. The next one is lifestyle choices or life choices, right? How many vegetarians do we have in the room? Yeah? Did y'all all know each other? Do you kind of know that you guys are vegetarians? Most vegetarians know the other vegetarians in the office, right? You know, it's one of those things where, you know, you seek out the people who have the same lifestyle choices as you do, right? I'm a soccer mom. I didn't want to be a soccer mom. I had to be a soccer mom, but I pretty much know who all the soccer moms are when I'm in the room, right? So the lifestyle choices that we have, the things that we do in our spare time, that creates a sense of belonging as well. If you're with a sorority or a fraternity or the same organization, even the same neighborhood, right? Those are choices that you make, and that creates that sense of belonging as well. The next one is nationality. And I touched on this a little bit earlier, but I recently did the Ancestry DNA survey because I got it for Christmas. mom did it and she was like, you should do it, Kimberly. You'll be fascinated by your results, right? And so I did the sample, put it in the mail, got my email that said, thank you for your survey, or thank you for your sample. You should get your results within 4 to 8 weeks. 4 weeks go by, I still don't have any results. And I'm like, hey guys, I submitted this and I should get my results within about 4 to 8 weeks. And they're like, really? They're waiting with bated breath, because they always say that when I'm with African Americans, I look Black. When I'm with Hispanic, I look Hispanic. When I'm with Asian, they give me such a hard time. They call me a chameleon. So I really wanted to get my results back to show them that my parents say that I'm African American. I need for y'all to know that I'm African American, right? They didn't believe me. So 8 weeks go by. They send me a note. Sorry, the volume is very high. We'll get your results, as soon as we can. 16 weeks go by, no results. Now the team is like, they can't even figure out what you are. So I'm like, God, please send me my results. So then I finally get my results like around week 18. And it turns out that I am 60% Black. And they were like, no, can't be. But in my 60%, part of that was Nigerian, right? And so I'm so excited that I now know how the part of my African American ancestry is made up. It's the Congo, Ivory Coast, which most African Americans have in their DNA. So then I'm in the grocery store, a woman who's from Nigeria. She's standing behind me, and I listen to her accent, and I'm like, so excuse me, ma'am, where are you from? She says, I am from Nigeria. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I am too. I love you. And we're sitting here talking to each other. I've never met this woman before in my life. She's from Nigeria. I just found out I was from Nigeria. I have a new best friend, right? So nationality is absolutely one of those ways that really helps us form that connectivity. The other way that you see nationality is also Olympics time, right? Have you ever been prouder to be an American during the Olympics, right? I watch the Olympics every single day, winter and summer. I'm there watching. I want to see everything that's going on, and every time the U.S. wins a medal, whether gold, silver, or bronze, I'm so excited. I'm very, very happy. And now I'm happy with Nigeria and Great Britain, because the other 40% of me is English, okay? So that's the nationality. Do I need to change? Okay. I think I'm gonna like this better. I could hear myself. All right, is this better? Can you guys hear me?
She can go ahead now.
All right. So the next one is professional identity. And so I work with a lot of CPAs, and they are very, very proud that they are CPAs. Let me just tell you. I've worked in the technical industry before, and I see a lot of you who are, experts in technology. You have some pride there too. Our programmers had pride, our network guys. Your professional identity is a sense of belonging too. Think about when you were at the last social event and you found someone who did the same thing that you did. There's this automatic connection that you have with that individual that also creates that sense of belonging. I don't know if you've ever been around doctors, but they love their doctors. They love their fellow doctors, and so it's really interesting about how our professional identity also drives some of our belonging as well. Okay, is it going? All right, so I asked you this question. I skipped one. So this is my favorite. This is my favorite part of belonging, and team spirit and social interest. I always say that I'm not a Cleveland fan. I'm not a Cleveland Cavs fan. I'm not an LA fan now either. I'm a LeBron James fan. And I like LeBron James for what he stands for. He's an athlete, and he takes that very seriously. And he takes his role in the community very seriously too. So I love LeBron, and I hope I didn't offend anybody by saying I don't like the Lakers or the Cleveland Cavaliers. I'm also a Tar Heel. I'm a UNC fan. Proud, born and bred UNC Tar Heel. And so anytime we're playing NC State or Duke, there's no other team other than UNC. However, when Duke is playing any other team, it's always that team I'm a huge fan of. My son is a Marvels fan. Have to put that up there. And then I also do yoga. I love hot yoga. It's one of my favorite things to do. But I have to tell you about fantasy football. I, for a very, very long time, hated football. Couldn't stand it. When there was a Super Bowl game, I was the person who was telling everyone to be quiet while the commercials were on, right? Hey, the commercial is on, everyone's talking. I love to watch the commercials until I entered a football pool in the office. When I entered that football pool, I won. And that set things in motion for me when it came to fantasy football. And so I won that league. The next year I entered 2. I won 2 of those leagues. Last year, I formed my own fantasy football league. So I have my own fantasy football league, lost. This year, I've lost my first 2 games. So I'm still a fan. I love fantasy football, but I think it's those social interests that really connect people also. Any fantasy football folks in the room? Nice, awesome, awesome. See? Connection there. But those are ways that we find and seek belonging. And so I always ask this question. So belonging is being somewhere where you want to be and they want you. Would you rather belong or fit in? Is being somewhere where you really want to be and they don't care one way or another, right? That's fitting in. Belonging is being accepted for you. Fitting in is being accepted for being like everyone else. So that's that assimilation. And so that's where we feel like belonging is really, really important. If we were to strip away my outer, what you can see on the outside, if I were to strip away everyone else's, what we want at the end of the day is to feel like we belong and that we're appreciated. And that's really where we're trying to go with a lot of the diversity and inclusion initiatives. And I always add belonging in there. So how do you create a sense of belonging, right? How do you make sure that in the area that you're in or with people that you're in contact with, you're creating that sense of belonging? The first one is to make an introduction, right? Hi, my name is Kim. I'm the Diversity and Inclusion Director at AICPA. What if someone were to say, this is Kim, she's our Diversity and Inclusion Officer, right? Or what is your name? Sammy, what do you do here? Scrub? Scrum Master, okay. This is Sandy, she is our Scrum Master, right? Scrum, S-C-R-U-M, right? I remember that, okay, from technology, yeah. Rapid development type of thing, okay, see, I still remember. So when you use words like our, or my, or she is, or he is our master in whatever it is, you create that sense of belonging instead of saying, Sandy, she's a Scrum Master, right? Asking questions, asking with curiosity. And what we always say, what I now say is that you've got to suspend your right to be offended if you're asked a question that people honestly don't know the answer to, right? I often got the question of, you know, why is your hair different than other people, Black people's hair? Or where did you grow up? And, you know, I got all of these questions, people trying to figure out who I was, right? And I often would get offended by that. I'm like, can't you tell? Until someone said, no, people really can't tell. And I had to suspend my right to be offended. And that gets to helping people get to a better place of understanding and who you are and what you have to offer to the organization. The next one is paying attention. This is my favorite because I have this bad habit of being on my phone or looking at something else. We all have this habit of multitasking in this age of technology. We all do it, we're guilty, it happens. But what I like to say is that you can either be present or absent, but you can't be both, right? So making sure that you're present or absent, but not being both, and paying attention. When you're in front of someone and they're asking you a question, put away the device. Give them your undivided attention. Look them dead in the eye to make sure that they know that you're interested in whatever they're saying. The next one is solicit feedback in meetings, right? We talked about being in the room, being present, having a seat at the table. But it's also very, very important to ask for people's input, Have you ever been to a meeting, you sat in there for 45 minutes to an hour, and you didn't say a word? No one asked you to say a word. Maybe that's your personality, and maybe it's not. But as leaders, or even participants in a meeting, if you notice someone's not speaking up and you know they have a great idea, your role is to make sure that they're being heard. Ask for feedback, solicit feedback, okay? Delegating. Nothing says I trust you more than someone delegating work to you, unless they're an over-delegator. And I know a couple of those people, right? They trust you a lot. But delegating as a leader gives your team the sense that you appreciate their you appreciate their abilities, and you know that they can get the work done. So that delegation is very, very important. It's a great way to create trust. And then the last one is sharing stories. I like this particular one because as you share stories, you get to know people better, right? As you share a story about what you did on the weekend, you get to know people better. And maybe it is that you shared your weekend with your partner who happens to be of the same sex. Maybe it is that you shared your weekend with your spouse who's from a different country and you guys went, on an excursion, right? So sharing your story not only gives you an opportunity to tell people about you and who you are, it also is a way to form that connection, to get those connections with people that you've had that you may not have had in the past, okay? So what gets in the way? What gets in the way of diversity, inclusion, and belonging? So one of the things that gets in the way is bias. You guys know what I mean by bias. You've heard unconscious bias, yeah? There's conscious bias and there's unconscious bias. Bias that I'm talking about is more around the unconscious. It's those things that our families, our lifestyle choices, our friends, our professional identity, our nationality. Bias happens because we're just human. It's the way that God has helped us be able to take in 11,000 pieces of information and process it quickly. Like right now, we have tons of information signals being thrown at us where you only think that you're listening to me. There are tons of things going on in your head right now. But the ability to sort and categorize that information helps us make decisions and helps us, follow through on things if we need to. Bias is good, and sometimes unconscious bias is bad, right? When we first, when people first got on the planet, we talk about cave people. I love this story, the cave people, right? No one told the cave woman to run when she saw a saber-toothed tiger, right? There wasn't a description that said, you need to run. She knew automatically because the teeth were big, it was hairy, it was bigger than she was gonna run because it was a saber-toothed tiger. Unconscious bias, right? I know that this is gonna hurt me. She didn't need to look up a manual to say, is this, go through this decision-making process to figure out it was something that was gonna harm her. So bias gets in the way. Micro inequities. Micro inequities, very similar to bias, but just subtle things that happen in the office that kind of put you in the back seat, right? So one good example is being in a meeting. You're around the table. You may be one or two people that's different than the group, right? You make a recommendation or you have a statement and you say, it's a good statement, but someone else makes the same statement and it's the brilliant idea, right? This often happens with women. It often happens with minorities, right? Or people who are just different than the group in the room, right? If you're not even a part of that team and you make the recommendation, you may not be heard like the people on the team, right? Micro inequities. Various priorities. Our priorities get in the way, right? What we're trying to do, we're so focused on our vision, we're so focused on our mission that we forget about everyone around us and we're just doing what we need to do. We're not focused on the people, and that often gets in the way of diversity, inclusion, and belonging. Control, fear, obliviousness, stereotypes, right? Stereotypes get in the way. And I'd also like to talk to you a little bit about stereotype threat. Stereotype threat was introduced to us by a gentleman by the name of Claude Steele. He wrote the book Whistling Vivaldi. And what he said was that individuals who have stereotypes that are placed on them, such as your gender, your ethnicity, maybe your veteran status, your military status, anything that may have a stereotype associated with it, if you feel like it's being applied to you at that very moment, it impacts your performance. And he proved this by several different studies. He did a study with women who were very, very good at math. This is at Harvard, Stanford University. These women were at the top of their class when it came to mathematics. And so he gave the women and the men in the room the same exact test. Now, the women had traditionally outperformed the men that were in this study. But what he did is that before he gave the women the test, he said, so this is testing whether or not women are good at math. And that's what he told the women. And that's all he said. And they performed lower than they had in the past, right? So this is a clear indication of how when we have stereotypes that we know are traditionally placed on us, we underperform. And so that's where we're trying to get to a place of, reducing the number of stereotypes that we have and that we place on people, and working on ourselves so that we're not falling victims to the stereotypes that are being placed on us. Old policies. I was talking to Brian earlier about your work from home policy, right? How it was an older policy, people did it, sometimes they didn't, but now it's a part of your culture, right? Now you're including that into your culture because we recognize that that's the way that people function, and a great way to keep your top talent, to be quite honest, right? So those are ways that those are things of how belonging gets in the way, or what gets in the way of belonging and inclusion. So this is an example of some of my unconscious bias training that I do. So I'd like for you very quickly, who would you pick to be stuck on an elevator with, right? And so you're looking at this picture. You in your mind are going through different filtering processes as you're looking at each of these different pictures. And I guarantee you that if I were to ask each one of you individually, you would all have different answers, and there would be different reasons why you would have different answers. For example, you may select this gentleman here. Someone might select him. Why did you select him? Or I select him. Why would I select him? Well, he reminds me of my neighbor. My neighbor is very handy, and I'm sure that he would get me out of the elevator, right? So why did someone choose this person? Well, she's pretty. She looks like she has a lot of conversation. She's very confident. Maybe she can help me get out of the elevator, right? So we go through these different thought processes. My thought process is very different than yours. I'm thinking about who can get me out and who can keep me company while I'm in there, right? Who I can talk to. So these are some of the things that we go through when we talk about unconscious bias. So we then have our journey to, and I don't know I'll fast forward these. Then we have our journey towards inclusion. And many companies and individuals go through this journey. And so the first one is aspiring, right? We aspire to have awareness of ourselves and of others. And that's where we first begin when we talk about diversity and inclusion. We can't begin to talk about D&I by dissecting everyone else. We've always got to start by dissecting ourselves. And one of the great ways of doing that is this tool that I've used in the past called the IAT. It's called Unconscious Bias Test. It was developed by Harvard University. So if you want to go in and take this test and find out what your biases are, it's pretty cool, right? So self-awareness, understanding self, understanding others is definitely the first step. The second step is expanding beyond your comfort zones and taking risks with others. And I say this expansion is more about getting comfortable being uncomfortable, right? So once I know myself, once I got the survey of the people that are around me, I need to emerge. I need to immerse myself into other people's cultures, understanding who other people are, asking questions without being offended, right? Asking questions with the intent of understanding who I'm working with. So taking risks and being uncomfortable. The next one is managing intentional practices and having measurement of progress. So we need to be very intentional on how we're managing D&I, And then the last piece is optimizing. We're leveraging diversity and inclusion and belonging to meet the needs of our clients, meet the needs of Dude Solutions clients. You guys are on the cutting edge of innovation and making sure that your clients are working as efficiently as they can. And so optimizing that difference to create those solutions is very, very important. So that's all that I have for you today. But I do want to close with this. We remember 10% of what we read, 20% of what we hear, 30% of what we see, 50% of what we see and hear, 70% of what we discuss with others, 80% of what we personally experience, 95% of what we teach others. But I've also added, we remember 100% of how people made us feel. So that's the key to belonging. And that's all I have. I'll take questions now. Who has the first question? How are we on time? Oh, we're good on time? Okay, great. Yes.
So can you talk a little bit about, of course, with everything that's going on in society today, there's been some conversations that probably need or could be had, but they're very hard conversations around just things going on with police, racial profiling, things like that. How have you introduced those into the workplace to start having some of those really difficult conversations?
That's a very, very good question. And it is difficult. It's hard to have the conversation. Oh, repeat the question. Okay, so with all that's going on in society, with racial profiling, police violence, all of the sensitive things that are going on in our country and in our communities, how do you have those conversations in the workplace? I have had many leaders who have said, we shouldn't talk about it. We shouldn't talk about it in the organizations, but I totally disagree. And I think it's really, really important that we do have the conversations. And my first rule, and you've heard this before, my first rule is to suspend your right to be offended, because the intent of the conversation is to get those feelings out. And I've had one employee come to me and say, Kim, my son was arrested, by the police, and it's really weighing heavy on my heart. I really want to talk about it, but I'm afraid to talk about it with my fellow employees because I know that they have policemen in their families, right? That's a very difficult conversation. And so what many companies have done, and we've done this too, is we've had discussion tables. We've had opportunities to have the raw discussions, and it's led by a leader who has, and my requirement is that they've read How to Have Difficult Conversations, right? You guys know the book, read the book. But it was led by a leader in the organization, and his focus was making sure that people felt comfortable having that conversation. You guys okay back there? Okay. I feel like I'm bouncing around with the, okay. So the important thing is to make sure you're having the conversations and that the leaders are trained to have the conversations and that employees recognize that this isn't a debate, but more of an opportunity so that you can see and hear what other employees are going through and how they're being impacted by what's going on in society. Because once you understand that, you have a different appreciation. Once we had the conversation about, the police officers and African-American men, once we had that conversation, the tension went down. Because before, there was this unspoken tension because we assumed that this side of the room was feeling this way and the other side of the room was feeling the opposite. And so when you have those conversations, you're able to alleviate the tension and to talk about the real issues. The goal is not for you to agree, to walk away agreeing, but at the end of the day, understanding where you're coming from. And that's all you can ask for, right? Thank you, Tara. Yes.
So just real quickly, since I'm talking, it's Sammy. No, that's okay. It wasn't important before, but can you talk a little bit about the importance of having diversity in thinking when it comes to strategizing as an organization, making decisions, having creative thinking? you have anything to share on that?
Absolutely. So there's a study that was done in Psychology Scientific, and it was done in 2014 or 15. I think it's October 2015. And basically what the study indicated is that we're smarter. Individuals are actually smarter when they're in diverse teams, right? And the study was done because the study was done in a way that they would have a homogeneous group where everyone was the same, regardless as to what that sameness was. And then you had a group that was diverse. You had diverse gender, diverse race. They had a diverse team. The team was asked to make stock predictions. Both teams were asked to make stock predictions. Basically what happened is that the diverse team, because they were from different backgrounds, made the closest predictions to true for the stock. So diversity made them smarter for several reasons. One was because when we're coming from different places, we have a different thought process. We have different education. We have different backgrounds. We are more likely to question each other in a good way for understanding. Remember the ask? We question each other because we don't know where you're coming from on that. We're also giving you different perspectives, right? Because we're coming from different backgrounds. We have different experiences. So the study clearly showed that when you have diverse teams, you perform better, you have better outcomes. And this is the same when you have diverse boards, right? There's a study that indicates that women on boards, the company grows by 35 to 40% more in revenue, right? So even if you have one person that's that matches your client's background in some way, you increase the revenue potential by 135%, right? So having people on teams that can connect with your customers, having people on teams that are diverse really increases the ability for you to come up with different solutions that help your end client, your end customer. Does that help? Okay. Yes.
Thank you. So something that comes up on occasion is we're here in North Carolina. So whenever we explain kind of our support model, we'll say, if you can excuse like our Southern drawl, or, you know, if you can understand how we speak. And I just wonder if we kind of in that desire to be self-deprecating, that somehow those of us that are from the South that are very proud then would take that as kind of a slant. So just wanted your thoughts.
So does this remind you of the stereotype threat? Right? So that's exactly what that is. Before someone is even applying that stereotype, you'll have individuals who are like, I know that I have the country twang, and I do it too, right? And the stereotype is that if you have a country accent, is that you're not as intelligent, right? If you're from the South, you're not as intelligent. And so we get into that stereotype threat mode, and that's where we need to stop, right? We all need to stop making that stereotype a part of our identity. You know, because I'm a woman, I'm very nurturing. You know, my kids may say no. She throws us cheese and tells us to go on our merry way, right? You know, we can't hold those stereotypes in ourselves, and that's where it gets in the way, and it becomes a perpetuating cycle because we see ourselves as a stereotype. Everyone else is going to see us as a stereotype, and that's going to impact their decision making. That's going to impact their unconscious bias. So we need to stop. Okay. Who's guilty of that? I am. I do it all day long. All day long. Good question. Thank you. Who wants to be next? Okay.
We have a Zoom question. I'm going to ask that really quickly. How do we bridge the gap between the diversity that we can see, race and gender, and the diversity that we cannot, preference and religion, and provide a safe environment for those who do not feel comfortable voicing their diversity? How can we be better identifying when someone is not being fully expressed and help them to connect and be included? Oh, sorry.
So I'm going to repeat the question. I'm going to summarize it. Basically, how do you encourage people who have diversity that's not visible to share that diversity? Is that basically what I got out of that? Okay, got it. Okay, so there have been programs that you can create called safe space programs. Safe space programs are where it originated with the LGBT community, right? Where you had employees who were LGBTQ and didn't want to come out because they were afraid of the, ramifications that they might get if they were to come out of the closet, if you will. So companies created these safe space programs where an employee could go to this individual and talk to them about who they are, be their most authentic selves. And so with these safe space programs, the more safe spaces that were created, the less barriers that were in the organization for the person to have reluctancy of coming out, right? So safe space programs are really good. But what we need to think about is how we make sure that we're treating people the way that they want to be treated. I always say the golden rule: treat people the way they want to be treat people the way that you would want to be treated. The platinum rule is treating people the way that they want to be treated, right? And so that's where we've got to have conversations and create this awareness and understanding of these different communities. That's the first step, right? So if you have this block or this bias against people from the military, or you have this block against people from the South who have the country accent, right? Do your education, do your own awareness so that you're not creating this, and I don't want to say hostile, but fearful environment where people cannot be themselves, right? If you're in a situation where someone feels like they can't be themselves with you, then you need to check yourself, right? If people are hiding who they are from you, then you need to do some self-awareness and do some reflecting on why is that? Am I giving them some signals to where they can't be their authentic selves in front of me? Does that make sense? Okay. All right.
Assuming that you've done some research into this and are aware of your own unconscious biases, what are some ways that you can challenge those and fight those so that you are not perpetuating those issues?
I talk to myself often. So I have three people. It's Kim Kita. Kim Kita is not so nice. Kim is who you're seeing today. Kimberly is my good self that I have to say, okay, Kimberly, you need to, So anywho, I talk to myself quite a bit because I do have a lot of bias. A good example is when I was at Marshall's the other day and I'm scarfing down food before I get out and go into the store. And next to me pulls up this amazing candy apple red Porsche. Beautiful. And I'm like, oh, that's a beautiful car. That's amazing. And then the man that gets out has on overalls, a white shirt, long hair. I mean, literally looking like, he owns the farm. He was working on a farm. And I'm like, what is he doing getting out of this car? And I immediately had to check myself and say, well, why wouldn't he? Why couldn't he own that car? Why couldn't that be, the favorite thing that he bought for himself in his 50th birthday? Why is that not his car? And I had to have that conversation with myself. And I'm like, it just doesn't go. It just didn't go for me. And I had to, what I think about when I see a slick car is a slick person getting out of it. And that's not necessarily true. And that happens to me every single day of every single moment, right? So you have to check yourself. You have to be aware of it. When you're walking down the street and you think that something should happen and it doesn't, and you're surprised, ask yourself, why is that? If next time you're on the plane and you hear a woman saying, hi, I'm Captain Jones, I'll be flying you to Raleigh-Durham today, you shouldn't be startled that a woman pilot is flying your plane, right? It happens. And so that's where you just have to check yourself. Every time you have a thought that's contradicting to what you would believe, right? We're also working on ways that we can reduce bias in interview processes, reducing bias in performance evaluations, reducing bias in promotions. And so you've really got to make sure that you're focused on bias when you're doing those very important processes, right? So even, looking at resumes, telling your recruiter to cover up what school they went to, right? Because I know I have a bias for people that go to Carolina, right? Or Duke, right? Cover up the cover up the name. Please just cover up the name. You've got to put processes in place to help yourself, right? If you know you have a bias on certain things and you're approaching it, get ready, all right? Get ready and be aware of what's getting ready to happen. Okay. All right. Yes.
So I'm looking around the folks here. There's a lot of leaders from Dude here, and as we're, getting this diversity and inclusion initiative going and continuing, what are maybe the top 2 or 3 things you would recommend to us as a company to get going now? I love the safety space idea, but are there other things you could recommend to us?
Absolutely. So I recommend in that whole self-awareness piece of it, reading. I have a couple of books that I would recommend to you, and these are good books to have book clubs with. And I think you may have been talking about, are you guys doing book clubs at all? Not yet? Okay. I would recommend, we just started one. And your first book is, your first book is called What If, and it's by Steve Robbins. What If talks about different situations that you might be in, and he breaks this up into different chapters. So you can, the group could read a chapter and then get together and talk about it. But he talks about different scenarios that he's been approached with and how he had to deal with it. How either it was a stereotype, how it was unconscious bias, and how he made a wrong decision and had to recover from it. And so he does a really good job in illustrating how it shows up on in everyday situations, right? Even taking his daughter to swimming lessons, he talks about how bias showed up for him there. And so it gives you a really good illustration of bias, of stereotypes, and how you can address them. And it's a really good way to do some personal growth. So I always recommend book clubs, and I'd start off with Steve Robbins' What If. I mentioned this one, Whistling Vivaldi, which is Stereotype Threat. That's a really good book that you can talk about. Whistling Vivaldi, so Whistling Vivaldi by Claude Steele. And then my favorite author of all times is Malcolm Gladwell. And so if you haven't read Blank or Tipping Point, those are also very good books. But I always recommend organizations that you start with self-awareness, because you can have all of the diversity programs and training, and if you're not doing your own self-evaluation, then it's really not going to create the value that you want to create. So I'd start there. Then I would have the organizational wide training and begin to evaluate policies and procedures that might have bias in them, that might be preventing you from getting to that inclusive workspace, right? So I would then go into that phase. So book clubs, and then getting together, looking at organizational policy. And then I'd also make sure that your leaders are constantly talking about it, right? Having the conversation when you're in your team meetings, right? What did you do? Going through that list. What did you guys do this weekend, right? Sharing your story of what you did this weekend so that people aren't so uncomfortable about that. Okay. Mm-hmm.
Everybody give Kim a round of applause. No, that was very insightful, and we really appreciate you coming and speaking with us today. I think we all gained a lot of good information. I know this will be great information that the Diversity and Inclusion Committee will utilize as we lift this forward. So again, a great appreciation. Want to kind of wrap this up by, again, appreciating everybody coming out today. Thank you for carving out time in your day to do such. We really appreciate the support that you guys are giving this initiative, giving me and the team, and that you will give the committee down the road. So again, big thanks for that. Also want to highlight a couple things here coming up. As I mentioned in the town hall, we will have our survey that's coming out. It'll be coming out in the next few days. Again, that will have information or have questions that we're trying to solicit information from you all as we move this forward. Information about, how did you guys feel like today's talk went? What other talks would you guys like to see? What your thoughts are about diversity and inclusion, ideas on how we can enhance this. And then also folks for, interest in joining the committee. So we want to have that in there as well. And then lastly, for moving into next month, we will have a panel discussion. And that's where we'll have the opportunity for us as colleagues to talk amongst one another, to just kind of get what we are thinking about, what we're experiencing, what are our thoughts moving forward, et cetera. So I'm really looking forward to that, because I know a lot of you guys have approached me directly about your thoughts on how we can move this forward, how you want to share ideas on, you know, things that you're experiencing in your day-to-day operations. So I'm excited about you guys sharing that with one another. So again, really appreciate that opportunity to talk to everybody. So again, that's generally it. I was going to keep my part very slim here. So again, I appreciate folks here as well as folks on Zoom. So thank you all for coming out today. And we look forward to speaking to you on the next time. Thank you.